It is no secret that Activision had a pretty rough year in 2018, with major announcements turning into PR nightmares, products not selling as well as they'd like, and lackluster financial results having scared away investors, compounded by the rocky stock market climate. The notorious publisher needed to kick off 2019 running, but recent developments have indicated that the company is already off to a rough start. In one of my previous videos, I discussed how Activision recently lost their chief financial officer, Spencer Neumann, the guy in charge of the money and assessing financial risks and rewards for the company's ventures. More specifically, Activision terminated his contract on December 31st, 2018, emphasizing that the cause was unrelated to the company's financial reporting or disclosure controls and procedure. In other words, while the popular assumption will be that Neumann was fired because of Activision's poor performance in 2018, the company claimed he was fired for other reasons. Beyond that, however, Activision did not elaborate further on the circumstances behind this sudden termination, though rumors soon began to spread that Neumann had been poached by Netflix and would be starting there very soon, with an official announcement to follow in a few days, as reported by news outlet Reuters, who had received this information from anonymous sources. So that's all the information we had when I released my last video on the matter, but since then, new information has surfaced, starting with the fact that the rumors turned out to be true. On January 2nd, 2019, Netflix announced that they had named Spencer Neumann the new chief financial officer for the company after the departure of the previous holder of that position, David Wells. Right around the same time, Activision posted an official press release announcing that Dennis Durkin, previously chief corporate officer, would be taking over as chief financial officer, while very briefly explaining why Neumann was fired. The relevant bit simply stated, quote, "Mr. Durkin replaces Spencer Neumann, who was terminated for cause for violating his legal obligations to the company." In my last video, I had raised the possibility that perhaps Neumann was poached before his contract termination, and that the poaching may have been the reason for his firing, and it would seem as though this indeed turned out to be the case. As games industry analyst Michael Pachter put it in a tweet, Activision's newest PR says CFO Neumann terminated for violating his legal obligations to the company. He was under contract, so it appears that the act of interviewing with Netflix constituted a violation. Sounds legally right, but the first PR caused some concerns. So basically, Neumann wanted to jump ship while his contractual obligations were still intact, so Activision gave him the boot. Cheekily, former Infinity Ward CEO Vince Impella replied to this tweet with, "Sounds like we might get along," referencing how he too was fired by Activision over contractual disputes all the way back in March 2010. The story doesn't end there, however. Not even a week after Activision terminated their CFO, another executive has decided to leave the company. The following information comes from an official press release posted on January 3rd, 2018 by company Square, who announced that Amrita Ahuja would be joining the company as their new chief financial officer. If the name Amrita Ahuja sounds familiar to you, that's because I've discussed her in previous videos. You may recall that Amrita Ahuja worked for Activision, having held a number of financial jobs for the publisher during her 8 years-long tenure at the company, including Senior Vice President of Investor Relations, Vice President of Finance and Operations, and Vice President of Strategy and Business Development. She became a person of interest for an investigative article published by website Kotaku detailing some of the behind-the-scenes goings-ons over at Blizzard, a company whose internal culture has been shifting as a result of Activision's encroaching and growing influence over the traditionally independent studio. In that article, it was mentioned how Ahuja had been moved from managing Activision's financial operations to becoming Blizzard's chief financial officer back in spring 2018, drastically altering Blizzard's priorities as a studio in turn. As Kotaku's article put it, quote, "In the spring of 2018, during Blizzard's annual company-wide battle plan meeting, Chief Financial Officer Amrita Ahuja spoke to all of the staff, according to 2 people who were there. In what came as a surprise to many, she told Blizzard that one of the company's goals for the coming year was to save money. This is the first year we have heard a priority being cutting costs and trying not to spend as much," said one person who was in the meeting. intriguing. It was presented as don't spend money where it isn't necessary. There was a perception among Blizzard staff that she had come in to clean up the spreadsheets, to save as much money as possible while at the same time bolstering Blizzard's product output. In a follow-up article, Kotaku also quoted a Blizzard employee who conveyed that the battle plan meeting wasn't the only time that this cost-cutting initiative was emphasized, with staff being reminded on a monthly basis. So, over the last year, Ahuja was Activision's way of planting someone who would shape the traditionally independent Blizzard into the publisher's own image, or at least that's how many of the staff at Blizzard saw it. This cost-cutting initiative is ultimately what led to the sudden scaling down of Heroes of the Storm and the abrupt cancellation of its numerous esports events, which, while not entirely surprising given the game hasn't performed nearly as well as other Blizzard franchises, did leave a sour taste due to an irresponsible lack of warning and transparent communication that left many esports players and casters jobless as the rug was pulled from under them. But anyway, given the major role she was set to play in Activision's plans to financially recover from a rough 2018 and in becoming the publisher's way of exerting more control over Blizzard, this sudden departure seems very strange and comes at a very bad time. Not even a year has passed since she was assigned as CFO of Blizzard, and yet she's already jumping ship all of the sudden. On one hand, this could just be Ahuja making the decision to explore new ventures after 8 long years of working at a single company, with poor timing leading to assumptions about potential troubles. On the other hand, her departure came not long after the immense backlash Blizzard faced for their tone-deaf announcement of Diablo Immortal at BlizzCon 2018, after the 2 articles Kotaku published calling out Ahuja as a key figure in Blizzard's unwelcome culture shift, and after Activision's stock price dropped dramatically following reports during their financial briefing that games like Destiny 2 were performing poorly and that overall monthly active users across all Activision franchises had dwindled. So it could very well be that she no longer wished to be a part of a company that consistently garnered so much negative PR, that consistently resulted in her name being put under a negative light, and that seemed to be heading in an unfavorable direction across the board. Perhaps she saw something about the future of the company that wouldn't bode well for her own career and decided to pursue greener pastures. While we're at it, let's also talk a bit about the firing of former CFO Spencer Neumann. We know that the reason Activision terminated him had nothing to do with the company's financial performance and more to do with a breach of contract. But the more important question to ask ourselves is, why was Spencer Neumann so keen about leaving Activision? Why did he go out of his way to interview with Netflix during his tenure at the company and under contract? Why was he in such a hurry to get out? We must once again wonder if this was just the case of someone who wanted a change of scenery after having worked at a company for so long, or if the string of misfortunes for Activision throughout 2018 and unfavorable prospects for the future made him want to abandon ship as soon as possible. Do keep in mind that we are currently in the territory of conjecture, as we don't really know for sure why Neumann and Ahuja were so intent on leaving Activision, but at the same time, the timing of a rough financial year, followed by the loss of 2 chief financial officers not even a week into the new year, is bound to raise some eyebrows. I'm not going to start claiming the signals utter doom and gloom for the multi-billion-dollar company or anything like that, but when 2 CFOs seem so eager to leave, one must wonder if this signals that 2018 left Activision more wounded than anticipated, or if 2019 is also expected to be a grim year for the company. Analysts certainly seem to believe 2019 will be a light year for Activision due to a weak slate of upcoming new games, with the optics of 2 CFOs leaving not inspiring much confidence either. This might explain why there's been such a big emphasis on cutting costs across all their studios, with Blizzard being notably affected by this directive. Perhaps Activision foresees 2019 being pretty rough as well. Now, one thing I'll say is that despite the sudden personnel departures and rotations, I honestly don't expect that too much will change about the company's overall goals. Some might celebrate the idea that Amrita Ahuja, who's been enforcing cost-cutting measures upon Blizzard under Activision's direction, is leaving the studio, and surmise that this might signal a positive change, but the publisher will probably just find someone else who will fulfill the same role and carry out the same tasks. As long as Robert Kotick remains president of Activision, nothing about existing plans for 2019 will likely see any drastic shifts. That's not to say the recent departures won't raise questions about what's going on behind the scenes and what this could mean for the company's outlook. Investors will wonder whether this all bodes ill omen for upcoming fiscal quarters, while gamers will wonder whether Activision is preparing preparing to monetize upcoming titles even more aggressively and rush games out in larger quantities to recuperate their losses. We've already seen how Activision's knee-jerk response to Destiny 2's underwhelming performance was to assure investors they'd be seeking more monetization opportunities, or how they're forcing Blizzard to pump out more games more frequently while cutting costs rather than allowing them to do what they normally do and take their time with their projects. Activision is clearly pushing for short-term profitability to bolster investors' confidence during these trying times, and given the company's history, there is no telling in what ugly ways this will manifest through future titles' monetization models, or what sort of ripple effect the simultaneous loss of 2 CFOs might have. I guess only time will tell how this will all play out, but in the meantime, I'd love to hear what your take is on this situation in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update. Thank you for tuning in. To be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out.